Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on Covidence Data Extraction, making Extraction 2.0 work for your project. So we're going to talk today about what's new in terms of features and functions in the data extraction section of the Covidence Review Project framework. And as part of that, we're going to also bring in some ideas and tips about building an effective data extraction form and process. And we will have a walkthrough of the new features and functions that are available in Data Extraction 2.0, and that will take probably 35 to 40 minutes. And we will then have some time for questions and answers from participants at the end of the session. A couple of things to make you aware of. I am going to be leading demonstration today. My name is Nancy Owens. I'm the head of Covidence's community management team and based in the US. And I am joined today by two of my colleagues from the community management team, Delindia Green-Laughlin, who is also based here in the US, as well as Nicola Mayen, who is based in the UK. A couple of housekeeping items to be aware of. This session is being run in standard webinar mode, and therefore all attendees are automatically muted. You can enter questions at any time in the questions box, which you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will address as many of those as we can at the conclusion of our demonstration. We will also provide follow-up information. If we're not able to answer all the questions that we receive, we will respond to those after the fact, after the hour is up. And as always, we have a link at the bottom to our central support resource, which is our knowledge base at support.covidence.org, and that provides information whenever you need it, including video tutorials and helpful articles about every aspect of using Covidence for your review project. So I want to start off with giving a little bit of information about Covidence data extraction. Those of you who participated in our regular 101 sessions that provide an overview of the platform will be familiar with this graphic. And this shows the part of the sections of the systematic reviewing process that Covidence supports. And I've put a circle around data extraction, since that's what we're going to be focusing on today. For anyone who's not particularly familiar with the Covidence platform, I'll just mention a few key things to note. That Covidence is a cloud-based online platform to support systematic review production as well as other types of reviews. It is designed to support efficient collaboration for teams that are involved in producing evidence research, regardless of location or affiliation. Because it is cloud-based, it's possible to sign into Covidence from wherever you are and set up projects that allow you to collaborate with your colleagues wherever they are. Covidence's mission is to create tools to make systematic reviewing faster, easier, and more enjoyable, and to enable research teams to use efficient processes and good methodological practice to produce high quality evidence. And you can see some numbers there about the number of people and institutions and projects that we have currently functioning on the Covidence platform, as well as that graphic at the top that shows you where data extraction fits into the segment of the overall process that Covidence supports. So we're going to be talking about data extraction today and how to do it in Covidence. So I thought it was useful to just have just a very brief snapshot, high-level definition of what data extraction is and how it's relevant to the way Covidence works. So the basic definition of data extraction is that it's the process of collecting, otherwise known as extracting, relevant information from studies and organizing it in a way that will enable analysis and synthesis. So when you're using Covidence to complete a systematic reviewing process or literature or scoping review, you're going to be starting with a potentially very large list of studies that may be relevant to the question that you're trying to answer. And what you're aiming to do through the earlier stages of screening is to narrow that down to the pool of studies, which will usually be a lot smaller than what you started with, of what's actually going to be relevant. And then when you start that process of what you've designated as an included study and you're actually going to delve into those and extract information, then you're going to have, even in a small number of studies, you're potentially going to have a really significant amount of information to work through. And so the data extraction process is going to enable you to focus in on what is going to be key to answering the question that your team is trying to answer through this review process. So with that in mind, I'm going to now switch over to the live platform and start talking you through what this is going to look like in the Covidence, in the context of Covidence. I've set up a couple of different demo reviews to show you some of these features, so we'll be moving around a little bit. And just to orient you, this is the individual user dashboard for my account. This is what everyone sees whenever they start work on Covidence, as both as a new user or as an experienced user. And as you become a more experienced long-time user of Covidence and collaborate in projects, your dashboard may be starting to look something like this. You can set up and join an unlimited number of projects depending upon what your eligibility to affiliate with or access subscriptions is. And this is, mine is fairly busy given my role, but it is certainly not limited. Anyone who's a member of Covidence could have something that has a similar amount of project work ongoing. So we've got two different demo projects here that we're going to be looking at to give you an overview of the various features and functions that have recently become available. And I'll also note, for those of you who are using Covidence regularly, you'll have seen information about a lot of these over the last few months. Whenever you access Covidence and there's new information, you will often see this little red circle to the left of the Covidence logo bouncing up and down to tell you there's new information, and that will give you updates on what's new. You can open this at any time and see a full list, and most of what we're going to be covering today will have already been signposted to you through that mechanism over the last couple of months. So we're going to wrap it all in together and give you an overview of how things work relative to how they worked a few months ago. So Data Extraction 2.0 has been in operation for over a year now on Covidence. When we set it up, we made everyone aware that that information is visible on the settings page in your review. When you set up a new review project, since Extraction 2.0 was launched, that is always going to be the default, unless you're setting up a Cochrane review, in which case it will default to Extraction 1.0. But for most reviews set up in Covidence, the default setting will be Extraction 2.0. And you can check that at any time on this first page of the settings section of the review. You can also change it. You can switch between Extraction 2 and Extraction 1 if you want to, and that can happen at any time. And information that you have started in one will be saved. If you switch to the other, it will not be transferred. They do not interact with each other. So if you switch between 1 and 2, you will be able to enter information into both of them, and you'll be able to access studies that you've included in both of them, but you will not be able to move data from one to the other. So that's just a reminder for those of you who may have had some experience with using 1.0 and 2.0. So this is configured for 2.0, and we're now going to start taking a look at that. So the first review that I'm showing you is one that has been set up to have studies moved into the extraction stage. So these are studies that have been designated to be included, but the team is now just just ready to begin work on this. So you can see when you open this section, a couple of key things to be aware of. First of all, you can see two buttons at the top, Data Extraction Template and Quality Assessment Template. And you can tell, because of the color of these buttons, that neither of these actually have a published template yet. When you're starting the process, you'll be able to see these buttons, and they'll be have a dark blue background, and that will tell you on any review you look at that there is not a published template for that particular aspect of the framework. And you will also be able to tell this because you can see the list of studies that has been moved into this section, but there's no buttons that will allow you to actually carry out any work. And that is, again, because there's no template published, and therefore there's been no form authorized by the team to actually enable the collection of information. So when you start work on your data extraction template, the first thing that you're going to see is the default template that Covidence provides. This is very basic, has various types of fields set up in it, and it's going to enable you to adapt it, customize it any way you want. So the types of fields that you can now set up, and we're going to cover these in a little more detail as we get into this, but just to give you an overview, is you can set up headings, level 1 and level 2 headings. The green fields that you see here are free text boxes. There are now two different types of multiple choice lists. You can see here, and I'll show you what this looks like at the bottom. So you have the option if you want to add a field, you have the option of setting up either single choice or checkbox lists. Single choice is what we saw up above, and when that's activated in the form, that will allow you to choose one option. You now also have the option of setting up a checkbox list, and that will allow you to type multiple options in here. And when that is accessed in the form, the reviewer who's carrying out the extraction will be able to select as many options as they want. So when you're setting these up, you'll be able to choose which type of field. You'll be able to customize it to say what you want it to say. You'll be able to put additional instructions to extractors over here in the items settings section. If you're setting up a list, you'll be able to add an other option where people can select other and then provide additional information in a field that will automatically generate. If you want to get rid of a field, you can delete it. And as you're working on building this form, you'll be able to see a preview on the right hand side of what that's going to look like when the form is complete. And this is something that can be worked on in multiple rounds. It doesn't need to be set up at any particular point in time or completed in one session. It can be worked on by any member of the review team. So when I have added something as I've just done, I can click Save as Draft. That will save it as a draft, but it will not publish it. And once I've saved it as a draft, it will also be visible to any other member of the review team who opens this up and opens up the template. They'll be able to see, this is one of the new features, is that it's now designated as either a draft or a published version, and it will say who has worked on it most recently and when they last saved either a draft or a published version. If I decide that I want to start the form from scratch, that I don't like anything that's there and I want to completely rebuild it, that option is here. This can be done at any time, so it's important to be aware of that fact. And if you do that, you will get a warning message saying that all of the items in the editor will be deleted. This is important to be aware of at any point, since there are lots of fields in there already that you can customize and adapt to your needs, rather than having to start over with none at all. Would potentially make a considerable amount of extra work. The other thing to be aware of is that you can do this at any point, and if someone in your team decides to do this while data extraction is ongoing, this will result in not only a complete restructure of the template, but will also affect any data that have already been collected. So this is definitely something to be aware of and discuss with your team if you're planning to take this action at any point. So I wanted to show you what that looks like, but I'm not going to do that at this point. However, if I do decide that I'm happy with the way this looks, I'm going to go ahead and publish it, then I can click this button. That's going to publish it. And you can see that, first of all, the button has now changed from blue to white, and there are now begin extraction buttons next to all of the studies that are in this section. Once you've published the template, you can actually continue to work on it. So for example, if your team is engaged in a pilot process and you test this template that you've set up on 1 or 2 studies and you decide you need to put in additional information, then you can continue to do that. You can make modifications to existing fields, or you can add new ones or remove ones that are there already. And Again, you can save that as a draft. If you make any change of any magnitude, once you've saved something as a draft on a published version, you will now see the option where you can revert to the published version. And if you do that, that will remove any changes you made in the most recent draft that you've saved. Again, this will all be visible to your co-reviewers. If you decide that you want to go ahead and publish it, that will publish. And then since no work has begun yet in this review, that won't have any effect on what's happening to these studies. So I'm now going to switch over to a review in progress and show you what that looks like if that change is made while work is ongoing. So you can see that there are 2 studies in progress in this version of the review, one designated as in progress and one requiring consensus. Now, and if I go into this published data extraction template and I make a change to one of the fields there, let's say, for example, that I have identified an additional source of funding that I think would be useful to add. And may be relevant for several of the studies that we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to modify that and I'm going to go ahead and publish it. And if I do that, you see I'm going to get a message saying you currently have 1 completed and 1 in progress study. Your team will have to return to all completed and in progress studies to extract any new or edited items and reach consensus again. So if I go ahead and say yes, I want to publish again. So you can see now that the status of the studies has changed. So this one says continue extraction. So extraction is ongoing, so that's not a major change, but I did have one that was designated as consensus required, and that is now changed. You can see the buttons, the status buttons, which were green to the left of both of those status updates, have now turned yellow. And even though this is showing up on the consensus required list, still it is designated as continue extraction. And I want to flag this because this is an issue that we're aware of in some of the functionality in the extraction section of the review, and that is that items will be displayed on various lists as they make progress through the extraction process. But if changes are made to the template, that will not always shift the position on these lists that you can see in this section. So that can be confusing. If you're carrying out extraction, you make a change to the template and you come back and you say, this is on the consensus required list, but it's now showing as continue extraction. And so we are aware of that, and it's something that we're working to adjust so that the physical position of the item will move when its status changes. But the thing to be aware of is that the status information that you can see relevant to the study is accurate, even if it's not showing up in the correct place. And so that is the thing to be guided by. And so the numbers may not adjust on these designations here, but the information that is relevant to each study will be correct. So I want to just say a couple of other things about setting up a data extraction form before we move on to some of the nitty-gritty of other changes that have been made. So this is something that's going to be an important part of the process. And it's important to note that this is something you can do at any time. You don't have to wait until you're actually ready to start data extraction in Covidence. You don't actually have to have studies in the extraction section in order to be able to carry out data extraction. And what you will find is that when you start thinking about this, which can happen quite early in the process, that even a list of only 10 or 11 included studies is, as I said earlier, is going to represent a huge amount of information. Each each of those studies potentially can have information that is a huge variety of information, some of which is going to be relevant to the question you're trying to answer and some of which is not. And so since you will be interested in some but not all of that information, you will need to think about that when you're setting up your data extraction form and make a plan. And that's something that you can do very early in your data extraction process. I have attached, there should be some handouts attached to this webinar for attendees that have information on resources. We ran a webinar about a year ago when we first were getting ready to launch Data Extraction 2.0, talking about the top 5 tips for the data extraction process that talks about making a plan, setting up a pilot process, and in order to be able to hone in most effectively on the data that are likely to be relevant to the question that you're trying to answer. And that can all be reflected in when you're setting up your data extraction template in order to avoid essentially a data deluge, because what you are trying to do is to organize that in such a way that is going to enable you to carry out some analysis and synthesis and find consistent data across a potentially disparate group of studies. So we've set up this default template. There are a variety of resources available online of how to identify what you want to include in a data extraction template, but we're aware that this is a very challenging part of the process for a lot of people, is actually trying to figure out what are the relevant data that they're going to be looking at. And so I'd be curious to know if people want to put information in, if people want to share information in the questions about what resources they've found that are useful, and that we might be able to share with the larger community that are relevant to actually trying to think through the process of planning out and identifying the information that you need to include in a data extraction template, because that will vary depending upon the topic that you're working on, the question that you're trying to answer, and what data you are trying to identify in order to answer that question. But there are lots of resources available to help you think through and structure that framework. And as I talk about some of the specific features, I'm also going to talk about how I've tried to structure some of the fields in this in order to align with what the data gathering methods might be that might be feasible. So one of the key things that might emerge when the team has narrowed down this list to the list of potentially relevant studies for extraction is that, having worked through usually a list potentially of thousands of references to start with, when the team actually gets this curated list into the extraction section, is that they might actually determine that they still have some duplicates and some overlap in what they've identified. And so one of the options that we have made available and have improved recently is the ability to merge studies at the extraction section. And so I've got a couple of examples here that are in real life. These probably wouldn't be merged, but just to show you what the process looks like if you have begun extraction or you're about to begin extraction, that you've decided actually it would be easier to just combine these into one in order to carry out the extraction process on both of these studies at the same time, rather than on doing it independently. If you've looked at the full text and you've assessed that the information is similar enough, that you can go ahead and merge them. And this has been available for some time in Covidence, but we've modified this feature, so I want to show you what that looks like. So if I decide that I see two studies that I want to merge, I just need to click the box to the left of those two and click the Merge as Study button. The system's then going to ask you to set a study ID. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be designating one of these studies as the primary. And so you can see that, I'll just back up for a minute actually. and show you that you can see that I've actually begun extraction on one of these. So extraction is in progress and the other one has not yet begun. And so what you'll want to decide is which one of these you are going to designate as your primary, because if you have begun extraction on one of them, then if you've merged them, any extraction, or if you've begun extraction on both of them, when you merge them, whatever you set as the primary is the one that is going to, whose extraction data are going to be retained in that merge study. So you may need to review both of them and make a decision on if there's anything you want to retain from the one that's going to become the secondary study, to make a note of that, or potentially run an export before you do that, so that you have that information. It will not be lost, but when you do complete the merge, whatever data is in, I'm going to designate this one as the primary, and so whatever data are in this form are going to be retained. And this one hasn't begun, but if I had anything that I had put in there would no longer be available. So I am going to you can now see, I'm actually just going to refresh that to make sure it's accurately displaying what I've done. So that's what a merge study looks like. So you can now see that I have the continuing extraction available, and I can access that. And when I continue extraction, that's going to open it up and show me the work that I've already done, as well as the PDF that's attached to the study that's been designated as the primary. I can still see the full text that's attached to the other one in case I need to. If I click on that, I can still access that. That will open in an adjacent window in case I need to access that information. And what the change to this is, in addition to improving that and streamlining that functionality to make sure that all works the way I've outlined it, the other option that's now available is that if you decide you did that in error or you designated the wrong one as the primary, is that you can now unmerge the studies. And it will tell you how many studies have been merged, confirm that that's what you want to do, and restore any extracted data in the event that the 2 or more studies you merged each had extracted data in their forms. So you can see that those have been returned to individual. No, sorry, I'm going to update the display again. There's a little bit of a lag there. But you can now see that those have been restored to being individual references. So the other feature that's now been updated is that it's now possible to manage the reviewers. This was previously, once someone had started work, it was not possible to reassign that role to someone else. However, this has just been released. This is, I think, the newest update to this section. And so it's now possible on any study where extraction work has begun, the manage reviewers function will appear. And I can now designate that I would like to reassign the role to another member of the review team. And when I do that, I will be given the option of either preserving existing extraction data or clearing extraction data. So that would enable the person to, if I say preserve extraction data, they can essentially pick up where I left off. If I clear extraction data, then they can start over again. And that is possible to do at either stage for either reviewer 1 or reviewer 2, or when we get to the point of consensus, the consensus reviewer can also be reassigned. So I'm going to show you what the form that I set up in the template looks like in practice. And you can see what a couple of the different options look like when you're actually using them. So this is a data extraction form that's in progress, and you can see at the top that these are free text boxes where information is being moved over from the form. And this table, this field here is a single choice option where I can choose one of those, or I can choose other, put information in. I can also clear that if I didn't want to fill in that field for some reason, I can clear it out. Several more options. This is a multiple option where you can see source of funding, select all that apply, and I can click more than one of those, including if there's an other, and fill that information in. And then we have the option of setting up tables. So when you set up tables, you have the option, the default tables that you see will be 2x2 tables. And actually, I'm going to go back to the template and show you what this looks like as part of the setup. And then we'll come back and look at this. So the default table has the default template, sorry, has some default tables already set up in it, and they will be set up as basic 2x2 tables that will have generic column 1, column 2, row 1, row 2 headings. And then these can be adapted and customized as necessary. So you've got intervention 1, intervention 2, and you've got 3 columns and 4 rows for characteristics. Interventions and comparisons has been modified. And I've set up a dichotomous outcomes table that I've customized in one way to capture one type of information gathering. And I have set up one continuous outcomes table that captures information in a different way. So I'm going to go back to how this looks in the form, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But you can see the various options that are feasible, and you can build out the templates, the table forms to a pretty significant size in order to accommodate the amount of data that you're looking to gather. So going back to my form, which I can access either by that edit hyperlink or by clicking the continue extraction button. So what I've done in terms of dichotomous outcomes is I've set up a table that could be designed to potentially capture all the dichotomous outcomes. This is one way to approach this, where the team has identified 4 dichotomous outcomes that they feel are consistently applicable across the studies, and have identified variables for the columns that, again, are also applicable across all of those outcomes. And so there's a system where the outcome can be designated with a number, and then these data points are consistent for any of the outcomes identified. And so that enables the team to set up one table that will collect information on multiple dichotomous outcomes for later use. So that's one possibility of how the table can be set up or configured. And then another possibility is to set up a single continuous outcome. And for this one, stay in hospital in days. Again, some options that can be applied to simplify the process, hopefully a little bit for the team, is some instructions on for measure of central tendency, use 1 for mean and 2 for median. For measure of variability, use, and then some options in terms of 1 for standard deviation, 2 for standard error, and so on. And again, there's a standard set of data points that the team is collecting and identifying which measures they're using in certain of those columns. There's also a note that's been added here that the reviewer has added to indicate something that they have concerns about or that they want to discuss in more detail when they get to the consensus process. So I'm now actually going to go ahead and resend this for consensus so we can see what that looks like. And then I'm going to attempt to proxy in as the other demo user on this, so that I can send that one for consensus as well, since both people have to submit it for consensus in order for it to. For the consensus to actually become available. So you can see some data has been entered on this one as well. Again, these can be done in multiple rounds and can be sent for consensus only when the reviewer designates that it's ready for consensus. And by clicking that button, does it then become visible to whoever's going to carry out that consensus process. So, and you can do that at any time if you want to have more of a collaborative process, or you can keep your information blended as long as you need to, and then release it by pressing that button. So when consensus process is underway, someone will take on that role. That can be any member of the review team. And as I said, once someone has opened this up and taken action, they will be designated as the consensus reviewer, but that designation can be changed with the manage reviewers option that's now available. And what they will be doing is comparing what reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 have each entered into the relevant fields, and it will be flagged where a decision is required. So for example, you can see where the field has been populated with the same information by both reviewers. The final decision field will be pre-populated with that information as well, and it will not stipulate a decision required, since that indicates consensus. And anything that does that there are differences will require a further decision. So, and you can see what that looks like for up above. We had a single choice discrepancy, and then here you can see what a multiple choice discrepancy looks like. And you can also see where there have been comments made that can be brought into discussion in the consensus process. So this will often be a consultative process between members of the review team, and so therefore that information may be relevant to establishing what the final decision is going to be. And that carries on through. And you can see how the tables are presented and what the, and essentially currently this is still work in progress, but currently if there are any discrepancies, as you can see, there are discrepancies in most cases, but if there are any data discrepancies within a data table, then the entire table will be prompted as a decision required. So even if you had some identical things, for the time being, any discrepancies between reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 data will prompt the entire table to be decision required. Okay, the final thing I'm going to show before we move to questions and answers is exporting data and what this looks like. So and while I'm doing that, I'm actually going to launch one of the polls that we attached to this session, because we are curious to find out what people's involvement is in this process and levels of experience. So I'm going to run one of the polls, and where we'd like to ask how you would describe your current level of knowledge and expertise in data extraction. So you should be able to see that on screen now, and I will move over to the export section of the review while that's, and let that run for about a minute. And I'll just mention that when you're ready, you can export information at any time from your review project by going to the dashboard and clicking on the export button. And you'll be able to see a variety of options for whether you want to export references from different sections, whether you want to export information about inter-rater reliability that's automatically gathered and analyzed by the platform as work is ongoing, and data extraction options as well. So this will allow you to export data. And what you will see when you go to this is also a recent upgrade to what's available, is that you can now segment the information that you want to gather in a variety of ways. So I am going to go ahead and close the poll. We've had an 82% response. So I appreciate that. We've been running it for about a minute, so I'll close it now. And I'll share the results. And it looks like the majority of our participants today, well, just about 50% of people participating today have never really done it before and need some help. So I'm glad you're here, and hopefully you're going to get some useful information and tips and resources to help move forward with a little bit more knowledge and confidence. And the other 50% fall into people who have some experience or are supporting other people doing it. Thank you very much. That's very useful information. And back to looking at data extraction. So as I said, we've recently upgraded the functionality here. So you now have about 6 different options of how you can segment the data that you want to export from the extraction section of your review, whether you want to export consensus only data for either data extraction or quality assessment. If you want to do consensus for both data extraction and quality assessment, if you want to do individual and consensus for one or the other, and if you want to export all data. So I am going to run a consensus plus individual data, even though I haven't completed consensus. But I'd like to show you what the data export looks like. And also note you're going to get a warning when you do that, because you can run the export at any time, but if there are data that have not yet been submitted for consensus, those would still be considered blinded data to the individual reviewer, and that would mean that you were potentially being exposed to data that had still been blinded by another reviewer. So that's something to be aware of when running these. So this is going to export as a CSV and open as an Excel spreadsheet. So since we haven't done a lot of data extraction, there's not a huge amount of information in here, but this will show you what it looks like. Essentially, it generates the form as a spreadsheet, and so everything is on one line by reviewer name. If you have consensus data, that will be a third line. But since there isn't any consensus data, it has skipped. So you can see the partial data extraction that's been done on one reference and that 2 people have done it on another reference, and it will give you all the key information. And there are a couple of things to let you know or to point out to be aware of when you're looking at these. So for example, source of funding is a question that allows you to pick multiple options. That is going to give you the options that were selected as a list separated by semicolons. And then when you get to table data, each table is also going to print as a series of cells on the same line, but you're going to get a table heading is going to be in a cell by itself before the table begins. And that's always going to be, when you actually have this populated with data, that's always going to be blank, because that's going to act as a delineator to show you that it's the start of a set of table data. And then you will get each column will be headed by the intersection, the column name and the row name that intersect for that cell data. So you have characteristic 1, intervention 1, characteristic 1 intervention 2, and so forth. And I'll scroll over so you can see what one of the data tables looks like. So again, you can see dichotomous outcomes, and that will have intervention 1 follow-up time days, intervention 1 number analyzed, and so on with the data that each reviewer has entered. And then this will enable you to take this information onto the next stage of work in conducting synthesis and analysis for the next stage of producing your review. So that completes the process, the overview. And we've got about 12 minutes before the hour is up. So I am going to go ahead and take a look at the list of questions, and we can work through some of those. Okay, let me just make sure I'm in the right place so that we can go back into the platform. I'm going to go out of my, and go back into the review that has the most information in it so that we can have that ready if we need it. Okay, so the first question that a couple of people have asked is, will this webinar be recorded and made available afterwards? And the answer is yes. Everyone who's attending today, anyone who's registered, whether or not they were able to attend, is automatically going to get a link to the recording sent to them. That usually happens within 24 hours of the completion of the session. And we will also make this, since this is a general informational overview, this will also be available on the knowledge base in the near future once we have access to it as well. Okay, so first question, and Nicola, I might ask you to take first pass at this one. Developing the extraction form is often an iterative process, and edits to the form often need to be made after you've already extracted several articles. When you edit the form after it's been published and after articles have already been extracted, will you lose any previously extracted data?
Hi, so you won't actually lose any data if you're adding questions. Everything that you've already entered will remain there. And the only time you would lose any data is if you delete any questions off your form.
Thank you. So next question, can you download the data extraction in an Excel file? So as I've just showed, you can export the results of the data extraction in the form that I displayed a few minutes ago. If you're asking about downloading the actual data extraction form, that's not currently feasible, but one of the things that we are looking to make available is a resource. And part of the reason I asked earlier for people to share information on resources that they may be using to set up their data extraction forms is that we're looking at potentially having a variety of templates that we can make available to people. Eventually, that's something that we'd like to build into the platform so that we have a template library available to people. But since people often ask us about having some kind of a resource, a template resource to start from, we're going to try making that available as a resource even before we're able to put it directly into the platform that people can access from the knowledge base and use as a starting point for building their own templates. So. Okay, Delindia, I'm going to flag this one for you. Can you please explain the basic principle of data extraction? That might help setting up the template. Is it based on search terms like PubMed? So over to you to take a stab at that one, and we can jump in if need be.
Yes, thank you, Nancy, for that question. In terms of the data extraction section of the platform, that information will come directly from your protocol that's highlighted that is for the analysis portion of your review. So that would originate from the protocol. That answers the question. Would you like to add anything here, Nicola?
Nicola, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that covered it.
Yeah, I think Delinda is, basically essentially that when you're starting work, having a protocol in place or having a plan for what you want, what you're looking to know at the end of your process is really helpful in helping you define what the specific things that you're going to be looking for when you get to the point of doing data extraction will be having, because as I said earlier, there's a lot of information that's potentially available. And so it's important to think about which things are actually going to be relevant to answering that question.
And I would also like to add, Nancy, to each, it will certain, studies will yield different results. So it will be something that it's not as straightforward as with the title and abstract. So that would be something that you would definitely have to be mindful of the expectations within the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have some feedback from one of our participants that I think is useful to consider in answering this question. It's that says, when designing the data extraction tables, we first tried to define our outcomes and then worked our way back. So I think that's, and I think that's an excellent way to think about it. So thank you very much for sharing that, Federico. After merge, the next question is, after merging, will records merged into the same study be sorted according to the sorting function as before? So if I'm understanding this correctly, what will happen is merged studies will receive whatever has been designated as the primary study will then become what is used to carry out sorting. So if you merge two studies and one of them is Hancock 2020 and another one is Lou 2019, then if you're sorting by author, then it's, and you designate Hancock as the primary ID, then anything that happens from that point on, the merge study is going to be designated as Hancock. So that is going to be designated as the primary study. And so any sorting or export will be on that basis. I hope that answers the question. And a related question on merging, and Nicola, I'm going to flag this one over to you. The merge as study button, is that for duplicate articles, i.e. same publication details, or for study results that have been published in multiple reports or journals?
So the intended functionality of the merge studies is for the latter. So when you have multiple articles reporting on the same study. Having said that, we do know that some people use it to if merge references if they see that there is a duplicate that slipped through and arrived in your data extraction. Yeah, because currently we sort of are aware that it's an issue if you do find a duplicate during your screening or any point in your review. It's not very easy to mark it as a duplicate currently, though we are working on that at the moment. So yeah, you can use it in either way, but the intended functionality is to combine studies that are articles that are reporting on the same study.
Thank you very much. The next question is, managing reviewers, do we have to make changes on the settings of team members then as well? And I would say I have not tested this, and I assume you're referring to making changes in the team settings, but I would say no, that any changes that you make in the extraction section to the manager using the manager reviewers function will override anything that's that is in the team settings for rules in the extraction section. Next question is it possible to change the number of extractors required from 2 to 1 partway through the process? Example, if 20% of articles will be extracted doubly and the remaining 80% extracted by a single reviewer. Does this cause any complications or issues? I will answer that, but Delinda and Nicola, please feel free to jump in if I'm forgetting or missing anything. So when you change from 2 to 1, that will be applied prospectively. So any studies that you've already done with 2 will remain as dual reviewer, and you can continue working on those. You can reassign reviewers and so on. So it will only be applied to anything that has not yet, on which work has not yet begun. So anything that still says begin extraction, when you change it to 1 person, that will then become a single reviewer extraction study. I'll just mention for full disclosure, if you do it the other way, if you start as a single reviewer, I believe that applies to all studies. So if you start doing single reviewer and then you change it to dual reviewer, that you will then have the option to have a second person complete data extraction on all of the studies in extraction. I think that's how it works. Your question was about going from dual to single, and I know that only applies prospectively. So I hope that answers your question. We've got about 3 minutes left. I'm just going to screen a couple of these questions and try to pick a last couple that are relevant. We will respond to, as I said, to any that we didn't get to. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to run one more poll because I'm curious to know. I know that a lot of you said that you have not done this before, and we are curious to know what level of support you're getting, especially if you're doing this as part of a curriculum or in a professional capacity, what level of support you're getting. So I'm just going to launch that now while I read through a few of these questions and try to identify a lost couple. And run that for about a minute. Okay, I'm going to close this poll. Thank you and share the results. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad to see that a good chunk of people are getting at least some level of support and resources. But about a third of people have not received any training or support. So hopefully this will give you a place to start and something to move on from. Since we're at the hour, I'm going to answer one more question that came up several times, and then I'm going to switch over to show you the resources, which you should also have available as a downloadable handout from your access to the webinar. The last question was, if people have merged and then unmerged, will the data be lost? And the answer is no. If you merged 2 studies where you had data in both data extraction forms, you won't be able to see them while they're merged. But if you unmerge them, then any data that were in the secondary study or subsequent secondary studies will reappear in the data extraction form. So I'm just going to quickly switch over to this useful resources page, which, as I said, you should also be able to access as a downloadable PDF through your webinar controls. And I am going to thank all of you very much for participating today. If you have follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us at support@covidence.org. We will be responding to anyone whose questions we weren't able to answer with more information, and any of those that are generally of interest to the wider community, we will try to make available on the knowledge base as well. And yes, thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are. thanks also to Delindia and Nicola for supporting work on this.